Liftoff. Liftoff. 8:30 after 8.
All right, welcome to AWS Made Easy, episode number 80. I'm Stephen Barr, Rahul Subramanian, and we're joined by Alee Whitman today.
Hey everyone.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. I was telling you earlier, but this is my first one ever doing in person, so it's such a fun experience to actually see someone rather than just being virtual.
Yeah, it's been really fun to do this. You know, there's a certain impersonality towards when you're just floating heads. Now, due to geographic constraints, Rahul, I wish you could be in person. You have been lots of times.
Yeah. Well, next time we'll get you in person.
Absolutely. This summer we'll plan a whole lot of these episodes.
Smart time to come to Seattle too. Summer in Seattle is way better than winter.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more.
And Rahul, you're not a winter person, are you?
I don't deal with cold, and it's funny that we all just came back from Vegas, where it was so insanely dry, and by your standards, it was probably not cold at all. It was probably nice, pleasant weather. But by my standards, where I am in Chennai, where it's tropical and it's a good 28 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that's in Fahrenheit, but
28. That's what, low 80s?
Low 80s, yeah.
Low 80s.
Correct. So yeah, the dryness and the cold, no, it is just a little too much for me. I wanted to actually kick this off by asking you guys, and Alee, specifically you, how was reInvent for you?
It was awesome. So this was my first time ever getting to attend as an attendee, not actually having to work at reInvent. And it was such a different experience. Like being able to take advantage of all of the different types of sessions and networking events and just being able to be part of it rather than helping make it happen was such a cool switch. I do like the other side. Don't get me wrong. It's so fun to meet with everyone, but it was a lot less stressful being able to have it from the customer side.
Got it. How many sessions did you manage to attend, and which one was your favorite?
Well, day one, I was really ambitious and realized very quickly I could not make it to every session I tried to get to. But I probably went to 5 or 6 sessions, and my favorite one was actually a Bedrock roundtable. And the reason I like that one so much is it was customers talking about their use of Bedrock, how they got started, kind of their use cases around it, and it really, as much as it didn't have to do with FinOps, it really did help because in the future, every team is going to be using that type of service. And so how do you onboard? What were the lessons learned? And just hearing firsthand, I actually ran into a couple of my FinOps peers in there. So I think it's fresh on everyone's radar too.
We'll definitely be circling back to that towards the third half of the show where we say, okay, what is the role of AI within FinOps? So we'll get to that.
I don't know, but if you got $1 for every time that word was said, I think we'd all be pretty rich right now.
Well, hopefully it can generate more money than that.
Okay, one last thing. What was your most memorable moment out of reInvent?
I would probably say the most memorable moment at reInvent, and this is more on like a personal side of it, was being able to see a couple of special folks that I'd never got to meet in person all together in one room. So back when I was at AWS, I was part of the Kudos Cloud Intelligence Dashboards crew, and we've never got to have Timur, Yuri, and Aaron and I all in one room. We were all together, got to take a picture together, got to be together, and it was 2 years in the making. So that was amazing, and I wish we all lived closer. They need to move over here from Luxembourg. That's all I can say.
True. We have the same setup where we're fully remote, and the times that we get to see each other are either conferences or summits. And on the one hand, we're all working really hard. We've been leading up to this event, but the other hand, it's like, oh, it's great to see everyone in person, and you try and squeeze in a drink or a brunch or something, whatever time you can. But it's hard.
It's also like, okay, guessing heights. Next year, I want to guess people's heights that I haven't met in person, and then see how close I am when I get there. Because I mean, if you look at Aaron he's used to be at AWS. He is so tall. I probably would not have guessed his height on a video. I've met him before in person, so I knew it. But you just never know how tall people are. I'm 5'5", so if anyone's ever curious.
No, that's always the thing because you only see the upper torso, right? I mean, that's all that's visible in the video calls, and you have no idea how tall someone is till you actually meet
Exactly.
them in person. But awesome. Okay, so we have a lot that we really wanted to cover, Ali, and thank you so much for coming on the show. Really looking forward to the discussion today. Why don't we just kick it off with telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to FinOps. You are, like I said, you've been at AWS working with the Kudos team. You are a prolific presenter at multiple FinOps events and forums. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Where did it all start?
Yeah, so we were actually throwing it back a little bit earlier to back to the college days, talking about Foster School of Business at University of Washington. So I actually was a finance major as my background and definitely decided I didn't want to go into iBanking. That was just not my path. So I did consulting because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew a couple of things I didn't want to do. And from there, I just got some really great opportunities and was able to get my first taste of the cloud and loved it. I was hooked immediately as soon as I got into the cloud space. From there, I met my former manager at AWS, Alex Head, and she actually brought me on full-time to a team called Optics. And that was probably where my love of FinOps took off. Before it was, I think I like this space. Starting on Optics was where I was like, this is my home. I really enjoy this. I enjoy the people here. I enjoy the practice that we're doing, and I enjoy the work that we get to learn. Every day is a new experience. And I was able to work with over 100 different companies while I was at AWS. And every company has so many similarities, but is so unique in their own ways that it just gave me such a wealth of experience that I could then take to now my current role back as a practitioner for a Fortune 500 media and entertainment company, where I see, a lot of overlap with some of the other customers I worked with, but also so many different nuances that we have that make us so special too.
Got it. If I can dive a little bit deeper into, or have you dive a little deeper into the nuances of being on both sides of the fence. So when you were at AWS, you were looking at things from the perspective of, hey, we have all this data from all of these customers. You get a lot of breadth across the customer base. You get breadth across use cases. You get breadth across so many different kinds of services. And now you're on the other side with possibly a narrower view of things, but a more focused from a business objective standpoint, setup. So tell us a little bit about those two experiences.
Yeah, I'd say if I could rewind time, there's a lot of conversations I would have had slightly differently back at my time at AWS, because now as a customer, I shake my head at things I probably said. I think the grass is always greener on either side, but when you're sitting there with all this data that you had when you're at a vendor, at a cloud service provider, you have so much data at your fingertips. You have so much just readily available to you that customers don't always have right there. So the first thing that, it would be is always only show data that, a customer has access to or can easily get access to. And I think that was one of the things that is now very ingrained. But, when I first started out, I remember showing this really snazzy report that it would have taken way too much effort for someone to get started with. I think another thing about this too is you really got to meet people where they're at. And that's something that, coming from, and I know Steph actually mentioned it, and I think when she was on the show, is like, she never starts with EC2. If people come in and start talking about EC2 optimization, they've lost me right away, because that is typically the hardest one to get people to wrap around on, even though it is a biggest spend. And Steph said the same thing, but it's so interconnected. There's so many nuances within it. There's so many little things that are specific to a workload that it typically is never the engineer's first thing to optimize.
Well, it is scary, right? You think about, hey, this is where my core load is running. The whole burden of managing whatever's on there is on you, right? It's not on AWS in any way.
Yep.
So yeah, I can see that as being very scary versus just paying a bit more.
Yep. And I think that was one of the things that when I just got, when I was getting started at my new company, just the first thing I did was absorb. And I didn't jump in and, start with anything. It was more of learn. How do people think? How do we work across the organization? How do I find my supporters? And, figure out who is in this space, and how do I best work with them to help them where they're at on their journey, but also make sure that I'm not adding more work to their plate. And a lot of that was, hey, here's all these different options. What one do you want to work on? And it was so many different ones across the board. And it was a lot of times what they're interested in or what they had full control over managing. And the ones that had full control over managing were services that when I was at AWS, we rarely talked. I mean, you'll hear people bring them up now more, but like Kinesis streams wasn't a big optimization topic back in 2020. It was,
Right.
a little bit there, but that is typically some of the easiest ones to get started with.
Yeah. I'm actually seeing something very interesting. We were reviewing a bunch of data recently across all of the customers that have been onboarded onto Cloudfix. And this is just aggregated data. We have about $2 billion worth of spend that we are able to actually look at. Of that, what I found most shocking was that customers were really willing to give EC2 as the first shot in terms of optimization versus something as simple as turning on S3 intelligent tiering. In fact, the number of excuses that I've kind of seen why people are not doing S3 intelligent tiering is insane, and for all the wrong reasons. And I think there's a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding of what each of these optimizations are or how hard some of them are. So I think I generally agree with what Steph and Meredith have said in the past, and you were just reiterating that you should start with the simple ones, get your early wins, and then progress. But it's just shocking to see how many people jump right into something like EC2. And from what a lot of customers are telling me is like they look at the dashboards and that's where the most money is. And so they go try and tackle that one first. So I think there's a little bit of mindset change that we've got to kind of bring about in a lot of these teams.
We saw this at talking to, I'll change some names to protect the innocent, but we were talking to someone and there was a lot of money on the table, but it turns out they were working with a third party who was managing some of their S3, and turns out they just hadn't tested any of the non-standard bucket types. That's all it came down to. And so they had these huge warnings: do not use the other tiers. It turns out they just hadn't got around to testing it, and it's so frustrating. But what are you going to do if we tell them they're going to use this person's product in an unrecommended way? Then it's going to blow up. Right, so there's this risk aversion. Plus, they're not the ones paying. So,
well, thank you for protecting their name, then, because that is insane. It's always very interesting. The folks who are only using standard storage classes, I actually, there is some benefits. I will say certain workloads, there's cloud benefits of being in just standard and things like that. But if you're not assessing the other tiers or using the other tiers effectively, why are you on the cloud? That's part of the benefit of being able to be there, is being able to use the different resources at your disposal based on your workload needs.
Exactly. And the beauty of S3 intelligent tiering is that it will look at how the access patterns look, and then decide where you really should be to be most cost effective. That's the whole point of turning on S3 intelligent tiering. Why would you want to make that decision yourself? It's something that I don't know.
That is one thing. Although I will say, it'd be a lot easier for folks to adopt it if AWS maybe just removed the monitoring fee on it. Just made it free. Yeah. I know they're never going to, but that'd be nice to have.
It would. It's pretty small. It's not as. Making it free would be nice.
It's a fraction of what you would actually save if you turned on intelligent tiering and just benefited from things moving to other tiers.
Yes, definitely. I will say though that one of the best things about just as our organization matures and as we work with different teams is how creative they've gotten. So before intelligent tiering, just clicking that button is an easy choice. But now we actually have folks that say, our strategies actually, we don't even need to use those intermediary tiers. We know exactly what we need to get to. We have our policies in place, and they're able to be even more efficient without using intelligent tiering now because they have those strategies. So it's awesome to see how a couple of years ago it'd be just turn on intelligent tiering, or last year turn on intelligent tiering. Now it's here's our strategy for these types of workloads. Here's our strategy for these types of workloads, and we're able to categorize them.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we actually recommend to a lot of our customers is a hybrid version of S3 intelligent tiering where you only go up to the second infrequent access tier, where there are no latency penalties.
Yep.
So it kind of at least gets them half the way there with saving money, but at least they're assured that there are not going to be any latency penalties. So if for some reason their application absolutely needs to use the data sitting in a bucket that's in an infrequent access tier, they just pay a very small increase in fees for data access. But the amount they save net is orders of magnitude more than what they would end up spending as an increment.
Yep.
Definitely. Now, I think storage is one of those areas where it's always growing too. And so I think we've noticed that folks are more intelligent at how they start on storage, and it makes it more fun to be able to work with them because, if you're stuck in standard for so long at the beginning, it's hard to get out of that rut. But what we're actually noticing now is teams are actually migrating or adopting S3 in a way that is efficient from the get-go. And so it's been really cool to see that, whether it be intelligent tiering, whether it be lifecycle, whether it just be their strategy of, hybrid cloud type of environments.
Got it. So just talking about the cloud environments, let's take a step back from your experience at AWS and other organizations and your current one. I'm trying to assess what the situation outside looks like. Like some of the folks at AWS, of course, and us, we've been at AWS customers for 16 plus years. We've kind of had the Kool-Aid. So we know, we're bought in, it runs in our DNA. But what's the situation like outside? Is everyone bought in across orgs? Does it come as a default first step to say, hey, we're building this new app, it's got to be in the cloud? Or is it different? Do we still fight the fight of the cloud?
I'd say I've almost seen a shift of that a little bit in the sense that probably a year or 2 years ago, it was drink the Kool-Aid, the cloud is the best thing out there. Now is the cloud the best thing for your workload? And if so, which cloud provider, which area is it? It's more of a how do we kind of have a governance in place on, workload best fit, but also where the engineers who are running the workload have the best fit as well too. So I'd say we try not to drink the Kool-Aid too much, because I think if we do it too much of drinking that Kool-Aid there, we're gonna get stuck and we might miss out on an innovation or a better place to run a workload that we weren't aware of. So while folks do out of habit fall to the cloud, what we're trying to actually do is have them assess where their workload should fit based on what their needs are, what their guidances are, and what their requirements are from a business standpoint.
What would be an example of a workload that wouldn't be in the cloud today?
I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits for on-prem for steady state work. Some of your internal corporate workloads that are running 24/7 that, don't have any elasticity, are very steady state. There's a lot of benefits for on-prem there. It also just depends on how an on-prem environment's run. The same way cloud has run. And if you have a cloud environment and it's running efficiently, it's not a good fit there, even if it's on the cloud. It's the same for on-prem. And I will say on-prem's an area that I am not as savvy in just yet. I'm learning a lot more there. It's exciting to learn it, but it's a whole different language to speak. And so as I've been able to get closer to that world, I myself am able to have better conversations there about what workloads should fit there. But, typically we say steady state workloads, like for example, the storage. If you're just going to use standard storage, maybe look at on-prem, because that might be a more effective cost solution.
Got it. So you are part of the FinOps setup within your current org, and you've had a view of, this FinOps space from the optics team standpoint as well, looking at it from the other end. And by the way, this is going to come up over and over again during this conversation, because you're uniquely positioned to kind of offer perspectives from both sides of the fence, which is very rare. You don't usually come across people who've had those kind of experiences from both sides and, offer that perspective. So I'm just, we're very, very curious to learn more about those differences. So just curious about how AWS looked at FinOps teams, and did you assume a structure about how things would be organized? And once you're on the other side, how have you seen FinOps teams being structured? Like, are there specific owners? What are the roles, responsibilities that you typically see across orgs? Who sets objectives? What are the objectives? And what does the decision-making process look like?
Yeah, I'd say when I was at, working with a bunch of different companies, I think the one thing that we tried to do a lot was trend roles across different companies and see like, hey, here's the persona you need here. Here's the persona you need there. What I've actually found in practice is it's very different and it has to fit your organization. There's not a one size fits all model. And so, for example, at our organization, a hub and spoke model works best. We are, effectively, we have a central organization, but we have a lot of different business units too. And each of them are run so differently that it's not effective for us to have just a one size fits all model and here's how we're doing it. My time is a lot more effective when I can work with my different partners across the organization and the way that they think about their business. And so at our organization, we have about, we have two people who, me and my counterpart, who are kind of our hub. And we have a spoke model with all of our segments, and we try to call them strategic partners because that's really what they are. A strategic partner is what we're looking for. They are the ones who are helping us figure out how we can more effectively work with them in their businesses. And so on paper, back in the day, if you looked at your central cloud business office, we wouldn't look like the normal model there. We'd look like, a small model in the middle and then a bunch of little spokes around the edges. And each of our spokes have different priorities or different ways that they think about it. I think as we mature even further, we'll probably get closer aligned with how those are. But what we do is try and categorize our pillars and who is our strategic partner in each of those pillars. So we know who to work with and who is kind of the needle mover in each of those areas.
Got it. And is there like a higher order structure that in this hub and spoke model? Because I think this is a question that a lot of people have asked me, and I'd love to kind of have others learn as well. We've in the past offered a lot of perspective on the single centralized structure because that's what our experience has been, and we share as much of that. So in the hub and spoke model, when there are strategic partners, but again, if the alignment of the strategic partners is different, if they have different objectives that drive them, what makes the two teams come together to achieve each individual's outcome? But how do you get those outcomes aligned as well? How does that work?
So I'd say that's actually one thing that at AWS or at any cloud vendor, and as a customer, I think that's where we probably are very aligned in it. You need leadership buy-in. If you don't have leadership support or leadership's blessing to want to make this a priority, nothing's going to get anywhere, because a lot of businesses are defined off, here's our leadership's priorities, here's how we're going to run our businesses. If our leaders aren't in alignment, if our leaders have different priorities or different ways on how they want to, use their resources, you're not going to get anywhere. Because if what's going to make an engineer want to take action if his leader's saying it's not a priority for them? And that's not something there. So our leaders do a really great job of communicating with each other in a similar type of model where they work collaboratively with each other, even though they have different priorities, different businesses. They partner in the same way that we do. And I think you could think about this in any way of the organization too. And from the engineering side, from the non-cloud even side of the world, it's all how do you make sure that you are starting with leaders having a same common goal. You don't have to have the same way to get to the outcome of that goal, but you need to have the same goal, and how do you support each other to get there?
Got it. So they make it a priority, basically, is it, for their individual teams to work together?
They do. And I think this is where one of the things that I've seen really great leaders do is they are very open to admitting when their approach isn't the right approach, and being able to be open to growth and change. Nothing is ever set in stone. I mean, if you think about FinOps, when it first started, when the FinOps Foundation was just started, it was purely like cloud financial management.
Right.
It is not just that anymore. And so I think you have to evolve. And actually, that's one of the things that we always talk about too, is what it is today isn't what it's going to be tomorrow, but we're going to grow with you and learn with you. And so let's do this together. Let's shape what it means to us right now, but also shape what it's going to mean to us in a year from now or 2 years from now. And a lot of that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
It's interesting how you bring up, we have all the technical discussion about S3 or whatnot, but really it comes down to managing people and at least modeling their incentives and making sure, like you said, everything's in alignment. That's the real challenge of this whole thing.
I mean, yeah, I am not, I mean, I can do it, don't get me wrong, but I am not the best person to effectively go in and action and optimization. There are pricing model ones I can help with, but I should not be the ones hands on keyboard doing it. It's how do I work with the people? And, I actually, before I accepted my current role that I'm at now, actually reached out to some close, peers that I actually got to work with in the past and mentioned, hey, I was thinking about taking this role. You'd be one of the segments I'd be working with. Do you think I'd be successful in this role? And, would we be able to have a great partnership? And he was actually one of the reasons that made me kind of make that switch over, because, just seeing the way that he was open to that partnership, and, it's all about the people. If he's not in support of me being here, I shouldn't be in the role I'm in, because I'm only as good as the people have trust in me, and if they can support me in the same way I support them. So I'd say it's all about the people. And I know people say that a lot, but it truly is. If you don't have support from your people, if you don't have buy-in, if you don't have that community, you're never going to get anywhere.
And especially within these large organizations, right? Because you want to save this large organization some money, but then that's not going to motivate someone to save a Fortune 500 company, some money, right? They have to have some more localized incentive or some alignment that's more motivating than that.
Yep. So from our side, we rarely say the S word, the save word, just because it gets brought up too much. But we say spend reduction or cost reduction a lot, and we're really trying to shift that over. But in theory, to an engineer, a savings. I don't want to discount what they're doing. It's a savings to the workload. It might not be a savings to the organization, though. But we call it a spend reduction, just to make sure that we're using terms with our finance and keeping our finance support there. But spend reductions, exactly like, these types of, there's so many different things that go into play within it. And how do you make sure that, you're making it in a way that it takes for them? There's so many people out there that, by nature actually have like a weekly, they're like, hey, this week I'm focusing on this priority. Then there's some that are like, this month I want to focus on this service. Then there's others that, it's not as natural for them still. And so they're really into making the ticket systems. And I think it's just everyone learns differently, and everyone approaches FinOps and cloud optimization differently as well too.
Yeah, makes sense.
Ali, you were just talking about the idea that everything is evolving so rapidly, and it's funny that you mentioned that FinOps is just about 3.5 years old at this point. So the evolution has been super crazy and super awesome to see. But when you're in that kind of a setup, how often or how far down do you set your objectives and your goals? Is it like a quarterly thing? Is it like a monthly thing? Is it annually? Or is it like a annual thing, but you track monthly? Like, what's the mechanics that you typically have evolved?
Yeah,
given this evolving scenario?
I'd say most organizations, or most large organizations, are going to go off their fiscal year goals. So we definitely have our fiscal year goals, but one of the things that we are very good at recognizing is our goals change based on the needs of the organization. So even though we are in our certain, fiscal year priorities, we have it here, maybe we might switch out a priority because of something new that came out, but we always assess those trade-offs and the priorities there. But I would say that the kind of key thing on our goals is we always try to have measurable goals every quarter, because at the end of every quarter, we should have something actionable or deliverable, or something that we can look back and say, here's what we accomplished and here's what we're on to next, or else we're just going to get an analysis paralysis if we only had a goal that we achieved at the end of every year. So we try to do it quarterly. We're actually setting our next quarter's goals right now. And and kind of the theme that we're taking for next quarter is strategy. How can we be more strategic about how do we work? How do we be less tactical? How do we more effectively use our resources that are available to us? But also within this strategy, what does that look like a year from now too? And what do we need to start thinking about, or start building, or start involving, vendors into, so that we're ready to support the needs of our organization?
Got it. So tell us a little bit about what your typical day looks like. How do you bucket your time during a day across all these different activities? And
It
what are these activities?
it varies so much, and it varies at the time of the year. I always, and I think I actually take it back to college. Some weeks you have lighter weeks, some weeks it's like finals week where everything is pedal to the metal. I think at the end of a calendar year, there's a lot of things that have to get in before the end of the calendar year. So right now it's how do we make sure we're closing everything that needs to be closed before people are out for the holidays, which is already happening.
Right.
And
Try to get those out of office responses already.
Yep. The out of offices are coming in, and it's a 2024 problem for them already. And we got to close it in 2023. So how do we make that happen? So right now it's been a lot of just making sure that we've closed out everything that has to be closed out. I effectively manage our marketplace strategies for all of our cloud providers. A lot of things need to close before the end of a calendar year. So that's been a lot of my priorities, is making sure that we're hitting all of our strategic goals that we had last quarter. And a lot of those seem to be closing items that need to be closed that can be down to the wire. So my day looks very different because what I had planned actually, for example, actually on Monday this week, what I had planned to work on was nothing I actually got to. It completely shifted. I was on calls all day, collaborating, partnering with people, trying to close out an item that came up that we realized need to close sooner than what we were tracking it to. So we all shifted gears. A lot of also what I'm doing is I try to spend a little bit of every week meeting with my strategic partners and making sure we're still aligned on goals. How can we better partner with them? How can we better support them? What's top of mind for them? And also bringing a lot of them together. So for example, before reInvent, what we really tried to do is get together and figure out what is going to be interesting for them to see there. What do we want to have as outcomes coming out of it? What can we be bringing back and use our time more effectively? So just a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnership.
Well, and speaking of reInvents, then once you see all the reInvent announcements, do you have to how do you all of a sudden ingest all of those things and then revise all those plans? Or did that happen this time?
Well, yeah, that is always something that's interesting. It's also how do we make sure what's announced at reInvent is aligned with how our organization should be thinking about it. So how do we partner with teams and say, hey, this came out. How do we want to approach this from our company standpoint? Like, how do we put the how-to with our spin on it out there? Because or else you just get a lot of people running at something and you get 100 questions coming at you. So we have to get ahead of that and create our guides, or just level set and say, hey, give us a week, give us a little bit of time to figure out what our position is on this. And we'll get back to you on it. But I think that's one of the hardest things about reInvent is it comes right at the end of the calendar year. And a lot of people are going on break, or we have code freezes. So things that we want to start testing out, it's what is the top priority and how do we make sure we have the right resources to do that?
I mean, even like Graviton 4. Okay, do we devote more time into ARM now, right? Because we have the R8Gs now. So what do we do?
Yeah. Well, when are we going to get them for the other instance classes out there too? We need some more. We need more than just R.
It is amazing. I still see announcements of Graviton 2s now hit this region, right? It's amazing that there's like a 3-generation rollout happening.
Yep. If there's not a new Graviton announcement every year, every other year at reInvent, it's shocking. So I've now come to just expect it. It's got to be every year, every other year, something new for Graviton.
Definitely. All right. Well, we're going to take a 1-minute break, and then when we come back, let's jump into, I guess, things to tackle first as a FinOps organization.
Awesome.
All right. We will be right back.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix is AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost-saving opportunities and not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the button to start saving now.
All right, we're back.
We're back.
Okay, so right after this break, we're going to head into a section where Stephen and I are basically going to, look for your opinion, Ali. And as we say time and again on the show, we are going to be very opinionated, and we're going to hold you to that as well. The general answer, that most AWS customers get from AWS and elsewhere is it depends to anything, right?
With Dark
So-
Open is printing a sign with that on it.
Absolutely. So we try to do the opposite over here. We try to, if there is a very broad-based scenario, we narrow it down and say, in this scenario, this is what you do. That way, it helps someone take action and not, go into this black hole of options that they never kind of manage to act on. So I'm going to be strict during the next few minutes as I ask you these questions. And anytime I feel like you're not being opinionated enough, I'm going to probably push you. But let's, I hope you understand the spirit behind it.
Definitely.
Great. Okay. So now the first question is for someone who is getting into an organization's FinOps group, which is freshly set up, and is trying to set up practices, set up, processes, set up collaborations, all of that stuff within their org. So for someone who is a newbie in the FinOps world, what are your top do's and don'ts as they get started on this journey?
Yeah, so I think the top do is add value. And how you add value, I think there's two different ways of approaching that. One, find your people. And again, I think we've talked a lot about people on this. If you don't have the people, if you don't have the community built, and so getting to know your community first and figuring out what they need, you're not going to be successful and you're not going to be able to add value. So step one is kind of understand and listen and find your supporters, find your team members, find the partners you're going to be working with. And I'd say the second piece of that is the value add piece. There's ways that you can come into an organization being new and effectively add value without doing it in a disrespectful way. There's little things like maybe a quick win that doesn't require a lot of engineering overhead that you can do that will effectively be easy to implement, and you give the credit to one of those new partners you worked with. So you're effectively able to go in, find these partners and give some quick wins to them that are low effort, low hanging, that make them look good, to elevate them up and get them part of it. So I'd say starting with just finding your people, building that out, getting a quick win and getting them excited, that will give you that initial value add that you can have while you figure out what does this look like and how do you fit into the picture. So, you never want to jump in and assume. It's definitely not something you want to do there, but find your people, find how you fit in, and then build out your charter.
So I heard two things around value add. The first one was that try and add value to the org, to your team, whatever else. It's hard to get to figure out what is valuable to everyone and do the one thing that's going to be valuable to a whole lot of people, right? Typically, someone in the org has an objective and you're trying to meet that objective as part of your charter, as part of your work. It might be the CFO, it might be the CEO, it might be the CIO. Who do you pick? Whose charter is it that you're driving as part of the FinOps org?
I'd say it depends on where you're sitting within your FinOps, and I know that it depends, but where you're sitting in your FinOps org, that leader's charter is probably the first one that you want to have on the back of it. But how do you spin that so that there's outcomes for everyone? So the first win doesn't need to be necessarily one that's for your leader. One of the cool things I found is if you find a leader's peer in a different area and are able to help them achieve a goal, it bubbles back up to that leader too. And now your leaders are talking, your two leaders are talking, and they're able to say, wow, you really helped us accomplish this goal. Thank you for your support here. We're excited to partner with you further. And so sometimes looking at the needs of your other areas are some of the quickest wins to get your supporters there too.
So let's take a concrete example. So let's say your FinOps org was the initiative of the CFO's office, and they decided that we're going to go do this. So typically the CFO's charter is going to be all about cost efficiency, reallocating funds for new R&D exercises, or whatever. Those are typically the objectives that the CFO's office is trying to hit. In that particular scenario, what are your top 2 or 3 do's and don'ts?
Yeah, so I'd say on that side, it's going to be what they're looking for. It's going to need support from it. So the first thing you can look at is from your partner side, like what is their priority and how do you make sure that you can spin their priority to align with your leader's priority? And so, for example, let's just say that the priority of one of the businesses is, we really want to do an audit. And I'm going to use a very basic example here. So for folks on the call, but like, let's just say our strategy, this quarter, we're focusing on efforts that don't require a lot of engineering overhead. How can we get savings without engineering? Because we're launching these new business features this quarter and we don't have a lot of engineering bandwidth. Okay, how can I then go in and hit my CFO's priorities, but using the priority of that business team too? So maybe we look at pricing models that quarter and we assess the pricing model strategy. We're able to get some quick wins out there. They're able to present to their leaders, but it still hits the bottom line of the leader that I'm reporting to as well. So really looking for how do we get to we in these wins and recognizing the folks and the partners who made those wins possible.
So here's a question kind of inverting this a little bit, thinking about the quick win part. So when we've seen people implement a quick win, there's 2 different reactions. One of them is, hey, this is great. We're so glad. We're so excited. But the other one was like, wait a minute, this was sitting on the table the whole time and such and such other person who didn't click this button or change this setting. How do you manage that or try and get things in a positive way? Like, hey, this was a quick win, but it's okay that you didn't already have this.
Yep. I think that is one of the hardest things. And that's it's almost like when people come in and they show you a list of everything you can save and leaders are like, we want all those savings. Why don't we do it? Okay, well, every action takes effort. And to a leader, how do we position that? Well, the reason this wasn't actioned at this point in time is because we were hitting X, Y, and Z business priorities. We were growing the business in this way. You never want to spin it as a negative, even though I will say, and I'm not going to name any names on this, and it's actually not even the company I'm at right now. There are some things that, were left for years and years left out, and we took it. We were able to spin that as a positive with them. It's all about how you tell the story. And I think that's what my job is to do, is to help tell the story and make it positive. So yes, every optimization technically could have a negative spin to it. Like, why didn't you do this from the get-go? Why didn't you effectively architect for this? Well, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's the biggest thing. And the same way goes for a lot of, leaders. There's a lot of things that they do in their organization that, why didn't they do it earlier? And you could ask them the same question. I'm not going to ask them that. Maybe it wouldn't go as well, but it's all about positioning it. So we try to make it a positive. We try to also have the engineers report their wins, not us reporting their wins. So it comes off of, here's what they did, and here's recognizing the effort that they put into it. Pricing model ones, obviously, you don't need the engineer always as much in it. It's more of the engineering's buy-in. So on those, it's who can we effectively elevate up in the organization to make sure that they're recognized for their partnership in it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I like the idea of just, the way you presented is we weren't focused on that at the time. We were in growth. I was listening to, what was the guy's name? The guy who was at Uber, the pragmatic engineer. Gergely?
Yes.
Yes. And he was saying,
right,
things at Uber, right? At one point in time, they were burning cash and they just didn't care. And they had a certain bug which gave everyone free food for a few days. But like, they'd rather fail open and capture the growth than worry about that.
Yep.
And so I could see that being a really good answer. Okay, that's this point we were focused on wild growth, but now we're taking a step to look at this.
Yep. And I think that's one of the things that we always are thinking out too. And one of the things we try to level set with leaders is like, yes, you could action all these. There'd be ways that you could bring in someone to action all these optimizations, but one little impact to your business is going to cost you a lot more than all these savings are going to get you. And so how do you make sure people are aware of the trade-offs? But I think effort goes down to it. Like, people don't always think like turning off even the smallest item does require some form of effort. Even if there's automation, you have to set up the automation first. And so if you don't have automation in place already, there's effort to set up that automation. And so I'd say every single action, big or small, requires effort.
Well, and even if the effort is just understanding it and saying, okay, I'm the person who's about to click this button, and if this button ruins everything, I'm ready to own that decision.
Yep.
So that is effort.
And you never find those people, but when you want to click it off, it's just, wait, let's get that in writing now.
What Yuri told me, he said, I was asking a customer to click a button for 6 months, and they finally did it. And this thing went down by 20%.
And I think a lot of that's on, if you think about the folks in the organization, that a lot of that's on me and, the people who are in my role is how can I better effectively communicate with them so that they understand, and it's not 6 months for them to push a button, because you can't blame them. No one's really recognized for when you do well unless it's really bubbled up. But if something goes wrong, people know really quick, and you're recognized for it, and it's not a good thing. So how do we bridge the gap into a 6-month click to a 1-day click or less than that?
Yeah, that is a really hard question.
Oh, go ahead.
So I'm going to actually follow up with the next part, which is what are your top 3 do's and don'ts for how you set up your organizational structure so as to better collaborate with other folks, as well as turn them from the 6-month clickers to the 1-day clickers?
Yep. So I'd say the 3 do's and don'ts. 3 do's would be, I think you started with the collaboration piece of it. It needs to be collaborative. So, build your sounding board, build out the folks who are going to be part of it. The next do is find your decision makers. If you don't have a decision maker or the leader support in there, you're not going to get very far. So get those leadership buy-ins, get what they need to understand and be successful so that you can add that part of it. And I think the third is bring everyone together. And it's not always in one forum, but bring the engineers into it, bring the business into it, bring the finance into it, bring your counterparts into it. And how do you make sure that they are all in alignment of the priorities too? Because if we have a really great FinOps practice idea, but no one's run it by an engineer, and the engineering organization doesn't mesh well with how this is structured, you're not going to get anywhere. And so I think the first do is just making sure that you're set up in a way to be successful in that sense. The don'ts are a lot easier. Don't come in thinking you know everything. The second you come in thinking you know everything is going to be when you're going to fail. You might know everything, but you don't know what it means in terms of that organization. So even if you are a FinOps pro and you've worked with hundreds of companies, working with a company and being part of a company is very different. So don't jump in there and assume that the way you're approaching it is the best way to approach it.
Got it. That makes total sense. That's really sage advice.
And I say don't go in there and show a list of savings opportunities. Just don't do that. That is like when anyone comes to me and is like, hey, here's a list of everything you possibly could save. I showed that to your leaders already and they want you to action them all. Great. You've just set up our organization to fail because our leaders now have false expectations on it. By the way, half of these can't be actioned because of this. And so now you get some unrealistic goals. You've lost trust with your teams. So I'd say it's great. We all know there's a savings list. Anybody who says their organization can't save anything needs to really go look in a mirror. But you don't need to start with that batting order list right away.
Got it.
I was talking to a friend at a past reInvent, and they said, okay, well, I've got this one thing I can do to save money, but I'm hanging on to it because one day I'm going to be in hot water, and that's when I'm going to push this button and get myself out of it. So there's a pro and a con. So that one is interesting. I'm very curious to see what that is, because by then you could find another one to get out of the hot water. There's always that is the great thing about the industry we're in, is it's like the best job security ever, in the sense that we're trying to effectively put ourselves out of a job, but there's always new innovations coming to keep us in the job. Yeah. And I like there is synergy between the finance and engineering, right? Because growing up in Washington, back in business school, we had these Boeing people come in, and they were very much like, we don't want our engineers thinking about cost at all in the slightest, because the cost of a mistake was so high, and they thought, okay, the finance people can figure it out later. But it's really nice to say, okay, you do have to think about costs, even if it's, you're still an engineer. That's coming, making the actual thing work is important. And I guess even the tone being set from Werner Vogel's keynote all the way on down about, okay, being a pragmatic engineer and having cost as a non-functional requirement
Well,
that's important.
how do you know what to optimize or what to start with and how to prioritize your time if you don't know what things cost? And I think that's one of the hardest parts is like, if you go to an organization and you say, hey, you can save all this money, I think the first question you need to ask is, do you even know what you're spending today? And you know, I think we're now moving along in the maturity chain that a lot of people say yes, even from an engineering side. Yes, I know what I'm spending. Yes, I keep check on it on, you know, on a X frequency basis. But in the past, it wasn't. And so they might go take an optimization that costs them more to do than it actually gives them back.
Well, yeah, and sometimes you don't even know it. Like elastic IP addresses as an example of that, right?
Yep.
Like, it could be, they might not have a lot. You might have a lot, but you don't know until you put in the effort to find it.
Yep. And so that's actually one of the things that what we're looking to do is like, how do we better get recommendations to engineers in the way that they need to see them? So it becomes part of their daily activities, not an added step they have to go do.
Got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's a question I wanted to ask you, Ali, across from your experience. If I had a 10 million spend and 100 million spend with the cloud provider, typically what's the size of the centralized, or what's the size of the FinOps org that basically is constantly working towards keeping things sane?
This one, it really does depend, because I've seen that was actually, so at FinOps X, one of the things I actually did was I went around and I asked people, what is the size of your organization? Because I was very curious about that. I got ranges of 1 person to 40 plus people. And
for a spend of roughly?
it could be 10 million to 100 million, like you're saying. A lot of those jump higher than that. But even spends of over 100 million sometimes have only 1 person still.
Got it.
And it's not necessarily the wrong approach. It's just the way they've structured it. I think, you know, if you look at my team, there's 2 of us in our central organization. If you ask me where I would invest right now, I would probably not invest in our central organization and adding another person with me. I'd invest in our spoke models and say, hey, you know, where do they need it? Because they're the ones that are actually on the floor actioning. And so 2 is fine in an organization of my size right now. I think if there was plenty of headcount to go around, everyone, I'd be, you know, sitting here saying, I'll take as many as you're willing to give me, but I want to effectively use the resources in the right way first. And I think it also depends on what is the responsibility, because FinOps is such a broad word. Yeah. What are they owning? And I think that is, if you're having them own cloud provisioning and cloud FinOps, 2 people aren't going to cut it if you need that. But if you're just owning a portion of a FinOps practice, you know, maybe 2 people are there, even if you're a centralized model doing it for everyone. So I think it's really going to be on to what do you want to own. So if you are in a state, if for any folks out there where you feel like you don't have enough support, or you feel like you don't, you know, go back and define, like, what are you actually owning, and set expectations with your leaders on what you can effectively do, because you can't do it all with 1 or 2 people. But if you set up your strategy, you might be able to use your resources in a little bit more of an effective way to, you know, make a little bit go a little longer, or say, we're not prioritizing those pillars right now or those areas because we just don't have the right resourcing to do that today.
Got it. Then following up, what are your tool recommendations for someone to make sure that they're at least using that, if not anything else?
Tool, like when you say tool, what do you mean by tool?
Like the kudos, I would think the kudos dashboard was the first thing that comes to your mind when you say, hey, when it comes to reporting and understanding your costs, pick the kudos dashboard, install it, start using it to understand, you know, where and how you're spending your money. That would be an example of a tool.
Yeah, I'd say from a tooling standpoint,
and we are going to be AWS specific over here. So
okay,
yes, we are picking a cloud provider here.
Okay, so I'd say the first tool, and I know this isn't really technically a tool, but is data. And you need to be able to have the data, because even if we have a tool available, typically the questions you get when people are going to action are beyond always what a tool has available to them. So if you don't have the underlying data available, you're going to have all these great tools, but you're not going to have the underlying source that the engineers need to actually take action. So I'd say top tool is data.
Got it. So this is your app either your application monitoring data or CloudWatch logs or CloudWatch data metrics, all of that stuff?
Even just something as basic as like the full CUR too is you can get a
Yeah,
lot of
the full
recommendations
CUR.
just out of that too, because you can get down to the granular level that they need to at least go find in their applications what they need to know more.
Got it.
I'd also say, and I think this is, if I got to pick only one tool, and I don't know if this tool even exists today, but I would prefer even just like a Slack type bot or something where I could just ask the question into it and it spits out the answer. I think that's coming in the years and,
Yeah.
varies a lot sooner than we think it is. But I don't want any of my engineers to have to go to a tool if they don't want to, too. I want them to just be able to ask the question that's top of mind and it spits out the answer for them right there.
Okay, well, as a quick shameless plug, Rahul and I have been using Bedrock to train a bot on all of our past episodes. And so we're working on a Rahul bot, or a cost optimization bot, where you could ask, what do I do about this? And Bedrock will have all of our past transcripts, and hopefully we'll get some good advice out of that. So I might be able to give you a Slack bot soon.
See, we'd love that. And so like from our side, like we have I don't think there's any shortage of data out there, but it's also just, and I dashboards and things like that are sometimes analysis paralysis too.
Mhm.
So if I was an engineer and I was just like, hey, what is my top 5 idle resources out there right now? And it just shot them the list. And you could say, no, don't like those, give me more. And it just give them the next 5. Or what are these for the non-prod environments? Just something that they could just ask the question into without having to go somewhere. So it effectively makes it one less step, because a lot of times what we see happening is people will go and they'll ask the question, but then as they're asking the question, they're having to filter things, they're having to change things, and you've now taken 10 minutes of their time. When if you could just ask a question and be 1 minute. So a tool I'd say is just like the one-stop shop to ask questions that you can always go further and pop out to a tool or pop out to something different, but make it more of a question interface.
All right, we need to finish the bot.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are tuned in, so Alee, some of the folks that are tuned in right now are probably here hoping that we were going to talk about, on Fridays we do the hackathon where we're trying to build out this Rahul bot, but this conversation was far too important to miss. So thank you again for coming and doing this, even though it's on a Friday. Okay, my final question for you is, AI, of course, is the buzzword right now, and you illustrated one example of what you'd like to do with AI, but how close do you think we are with that?
I think we're very close. I think of large organizations, we're treading very lightly on how we approach this. And I think every organization is treading lightly on how we approach this, because you've seen a lot of things that can go wrong, but you've also seen a lot of things that can go right too. So I'd say we're very close. And I'd say if we're sitting in the room next time at this year and we haven't seen more adoption of it, we all need to come together collectively and build something or do something to make it so it's a little bit more readily available. But I think it's coming. I will say that was one thing about reInvent, that they said those words way too much. Every session did it was a buzzword. What I want to see next year is demonstrations of it, how it's actually being used though, and how it's in every organization, and it's not a word, it's just part of practice now.
Yep. Makes sense.
Well, all right, well, let's set the date. We're going to check in December.
Yep, December. What is today even?
Okay, this
15th.
Today is the 15th of December.
So 15th of December, 2024. Let's see. How much did they use AI, and what was the hype to product ratio?
Yep.
Let's see if that's gone down a bit.
Let's see what it is. I mean, I know they have, or hopefully there's no capacity issues, though. That's the one thing we got to be worried about now.
And there'll be Graviton 5.
There'll be Graviton 5. Maybe we'll be at 6 already at that point. Who knows?
That would be cool.
Yeah, mid-year release would be interesting.
No, they wouldn't do that, but who knows?
Anyway, I think we're coming up on time. Alee, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and talking with us. It's always a pleasure to hear you and all your insights. So thank you. And we are definitely going to have you back on the show to talk about more topics. And also discuss how you and the org has evolved from a maturity standpoint. We'd love the new lessons as and when you get them.
Definitely, and I gotta see this bot when you get it out there. We're excited for that.
Yeah.
So, when is that bot going to be done?
A few more hackathons. All right, let's just make a goal. Let's say we get something out first week of January.
Oh wow!
I mean, we've
First
got
week
it
of Jan.
trained, we've got it tested. It's pretty neat. You can ask it a question; it'll even show the episode where the fact backed up. We asked it a GPU question that went to Rick's episode. It was cool. Compute optimizer question. So, yeah, there's a lot there.
Are you fact checking the episodes too? Like, did Rick say an accurate statement according to their user guide? No, I'm just kidding.
I tagged him when we were testing it on stream, and he came in and looked. So we'll work on it.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see that. Very cool.
Great.
All right. But thanks,
It's a
everyone.
public release. Thanks, everyone. And thank you,
Thank
Ali.
you.
See you all soon.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop overspending on